welcome back. I'm here with Jeff Firewalker Schmidt. Hi, Jeff. Thanks for being here.
So good to see you, Beth.
So good to have you. I'm really excited to get into it today. And, the first question I always ask all my speakers is, how did you get on this path? I usually make the joke, were you once a corporate attorney? And you have such a really interesting background that I find very fascinating. And I'm curious, what was your pathway to where you are now with the Eagle Condor? And, you could start by sharing a little bit about the Eagle Condor Council and what you're up to.
Well, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to sit with you today, Beth. So my nonprofit has been working for about 12 years in education and advocacy in the healing arts and cosmologies of South America. We provide all sorts of different education programs as well as eco-spiritual travel and pilgrimage. And, as with many of us, this was not planned. This path of medicine was not planned. If you would have known me 35, 40 years ago, I would have told you that anything that was of interest to me in the spiritual domain had to do with Chinese martial arts and Taoism and Chinese philosophy. And it wasn't really until I was, pretty advanced in my academic career that I had a certain bizarre set of circumstances unfold. I was actually helping the then head of the University of North Carolina system establish a new research institute up here in Western North Carolina that was to be focused on botanical research, botanical medicines, natural medicines. And as a consequence of that, I met many people that were working in the space of native spirituality, native medicines. And one thing came to another, and I met the person that would become my first maestro in the ways of South American vegetalista and sacred medicine traditions. And it was under his tutelage that I became a tabaquero, one who heals with tobacco, and later a huachumero. Many of you know probably that San Pedro is essentially the South American cousin of peyote. And that's another medicine that I carry. So it was absolutely nothing planned. And I did the majority of my training essentially on the down low while I was still a university professor and department head at a major medical center. So, many of my colleagues now believe that I've lost my mind, and I decided to sort of take that as a compliment.
I love it. By the way, I'm going to shout out to Tar Heels in the house. The University of North Carolina. So I find it fascinating that you were, a scientist essentially, and kind of led onto this path. And I did your Eagle Condor Council, and I found that this is actually what I love the most, was blending in kind of the science behind how all this works and what it all is. And there's something that actually really stuck with me about tobacco. And I would actually love to ask you a little bit about this, because you did, and let's hear a little bit about your background in this. You were working in the tobacco industry in North Carolina, am I correct?
Or not exactly.
Not exactly.
I was invited by some friends of mine who were scientists working for the tobacco industry to be part of a consortium. At the time, there was the understanding, this was like in the early mid 90s, that a whole new wave of litigation was about to hit the tobacco industry as a whole. And the leadership in the tobacco industry decided, well, goodness gracious, we better understand what our product does in the human body. And there was at that time a lot understood about cardiovascular liabilities, cancer issues, et cetera, but very little understood about the interaction between compounds in tobacco and the brain. And so I was invited to be part of a small research team to actually start figuring it out. And what happened at the same time was that a friend of ours at Virginia Tech had done a major epidemiological study with a couple 100,000 people showing for the first time an inverse correlation between tobacco use and neurodegenerative disease. So basically, his finding was if you smoke for a period of 5 years at any point of your life, your chances of getting Alzheimer's type dementia is cut in half. And if you do get unlucky enough to get Alzheimer's, the age of onset is delayed 2 or 3 years. So there was, for the first time, evidence of, in the Western medical paradigm, actually a beneficial effect, that somehow there was a correlation between keeping the brain healthy and smoking. So that actually gave us quite a bit of fuel and sent us on what ended up being the greatest scientific odyssey of my life. We built a huge international team. We had all the possible money that we could want for research and didn't have to write grants, which was, as a dyed-in-the-wool academician, was a huge luxury. We had 2 people on our team that were slated for the Nobel Prize. And over a few year period, not only did we unravel how nicotine and other compounds in tobacco were neuroprotective, but we also solved a significant mystery in neuroscience about cognition. The thing that is so wild about the plant tobacco, it's unlike any other plant that's ever been discovered. It is a cognitive Swiss Army knife. You, as the person ingesting the tobacco, either consciously or unconsciously tell the tobacco what outcome you want. It can be a stimulant, a euphoriant, a memory enhancer, an attention enhancer, a digestive aid. There are a whole host, over a dozen, of what we refer to in neuroscience as neuropsychopharmacologies associated with it. And that was the great mystery. It was like, how does one plant, one molecule, nicotine, do this? And we knew at the time that nicotine actually imitates the main neurotransmitter in the body, acetylcholine. As a matter of fact, much of the machinery that recognizes acetylcholine can't tell acetylcholine from nicotine. But nicotine, once it interacts with that machinery, has different outcomes. And so what we discovered was that in combination with your conscious intention, the nicotine interacting with those circuits tunes your brain function in one direction or another. And what's so fascinating about that is that if you go to stories, ancient stories, native and indigenous stories of the origin of tobacco, it speaks to that very thing, that grandfather tobacco is the great shapeshifter, the great Swiss Army knife, tool, ally, teacher. And it's also said in native circles that he's a really nice guy and he gets along with all of the other plant people. So he's a great collaborator. So that's why you see tobacco, where it grows in the native context, being employed along with so many other visionary plants. And in addition, in the diaspora of tobacco around the world in the 15, 16, and 1700s, native cultures that came in contact with that, almost to a culture, wove the use of tobacco into their sacred rituals. I mean, you go throughout Bali, Southeast Asia, and you see sacred use of this plant, and it's only been there a few hundred years. And there's this universal recognition by native peoples whose sensory system is open enough to see this and understand this, that this is probably the most powerful, the most significant of all of the plant teachers. And what do I mean when I say plant teachers? The native view is that there are a small number of exalted plants that have co-evolved with humanity and aren't just plants, but a non-local, universal consciousness that if you have the plant in your hand and you pray with it, then that spirit comes to interact with you and to be a helper. And, on the flip side of it, people who don't interact with the plant that way. The plant is just the plant. And, in tobacco commerce, that's why we see so many problems. Native peoples will tell you, never put tobacco smoke in your lungs. That'll make you sick. It's understood in a very different way. And so one of the reasons that I've dedicated so much of my life to working with this plant and the rituals that surround the offering and sharing of its intelligence is because it is a foil and an antidote to the reductionist, materialist viewpoint that we have about things. These are living, conscious beings. And, many native traditions are either pantheistic or panentheistic. There's this understanding that within all matter, there is a spark of the sacred, a spark of the eternal, a spark of the divine. And so I know that's a long-winded answer to your question, but here we are.
Ooh, thank you for sharing. I got teary-eyed. So when I first heard about you and your work, it was actually, I want to say 21 or 2, I think. You were offering a tobacco weekend at someone's place near me. And I remember being like really drawn to it, but also kind of scared. I grew up as one of these people, and probably like a lot of people out there who's, I associated tobacco, even being on this medicine path for so long. I still associated tobacco with the plant or the drug that killed my father. My dad was a smoker. I hated it my whole life. And then, of course, he died of lung cancer due to the smoking, and it was one of those things. And I grew up really just hating it. And as I walked onto this path, probably like a lot of people, we start to hear and learn about the real spirit of this sacred plant. And I was really drawn to that. And of course, I regretted not going. But then when we really dove into this work in the Eagle Condor Council, it's completely changed my relationship with tobacco. And there's been numerous, I think, people out there realizing like tobacco has been helping heal COVID. I actually just had one of these mysterious illnesses over the last couple months and was really in a hard portal. And at one point, my intuition was like, smoke mapacho and make a prayer. And I started smoking it. And I'm telling you, that's when things started to clear up. It's like, how do you explain this? So I wanted to ask you about this because, what you had said that the tobacco is friends with everyone, and it really is this, Swiss Army knife that kind of cuts to the chase and helps you heal. And I think it's been so misunderstood, and it still is, of course. And it's really interesting, even with you and your background, and then how it's moved from this kind of only science, researcher into this kind of the sacred and the spiritual. But you do bridge a lot of this into your work. And I'm curious, when you found this vegetalista path and, met your first maestro, how did you eventually, take that leap into more of the realm of what you're doing now versus, your kind of previous life? Because there's a lot of listeners that are going through this. I think there's a lot of people in general out there that are in, maybe careers and there's nothing wrong with it, but they feel like, okay, there's something more, or it's misaligned, or my heart is called to make a bigger difference versus just being a cog in the wheel of capitalism. But what was your path to jumping into Eagle Condor full time?
Well, that's a really great question. There's a lot in there and a lot to share. So first and foremost, with any inner path, any inner tradition, sort of worth its weight and still intact, if you become a devotee of that path, there is a matter of renunciation. There is a matter of as Chuang Tzu, the great Chinese philosopher, said, to leap into the boundless and make it your home. Do you trust enough in the universe to drink that cup of medicine? Do you trust in the universe enough to jump into the abyss knowing that there will be something to catch you? And, I got to a point in my science career where it was an enviable career. I had 2 secretaries, multi-million-dollar a year budget, professorships in multiple departments at a major university. My ego was well tended and my bank account was well filled. So I had everything essentially that I needed to keep me distracted from my real work. And the day that I discovered that that was the case, I knew that I couldn't stay. So one day, amidst many projects and the continued upward rise of my career, I walked. And my former partner was like, okay, let's take a deep breath and let's do this, and which was quite a gift. And right after I did that, I decided not to touch anything in science for about almost 2 years, which was a very big shift. But teachers continued to show up, opportunities continued to show up, and it became clear that I needed to continue teaching. You know, I've taught all my life, and it's a huge passion, an absolutely huge passion. And then I learned about Indian prophecy, the prophecy that is essentially very similar to prophecies around the world, that right now we are in a place that may have been encountered by two-leggeds on this planet before, and we have the opportunity through this convergence of events and thresholds and cosmological forces to actually take a huge step forward, take a huge evolutionary step forward. And that one of the most important agents, and this is very close to being universal Indian prophecy, is this concept of Chakaruna. And this kind of addresses your question about people that are on the threshold and trying to make sense of what their next steps might be and how to actually be effective and helpful in this time of transformation. Chakaruna is a term in the language Quechua, which is the native pre-Columbian language group that prevailed in most of South America before the conquistadors. And so essentially Chakaruna means bridge person. And what our elders tell us is that we are moving out of a very long, multi-thousand year phase that is primarily focused on the development and attunement of the mental field. And I think we've accomplished that. I mean, we've created a hot friggin' mess as a consequence, but we have deepened and broadened the mental field quite substantially. And as a matter of fact, from the sacred perspective and the non-local perspective, I tend to believe what Teilhard de Chardin proposed, 50s, 60s years ago, that essentially what we've been doing in the past 1,000 years or so is building another non-local structure, very much like the collective unconscious, called the noosphere, which is the non-local, multidimensional repository for all knowledge acquired through the mental field. And that essentially one of the things that characterizes this time in our evolution is that job is complete. And that has a lot of implications. From the perspective of Teilhard de Chardin, it means that the evolutionary shackles are off. One of the things that he posited that really I think is a very potent question that we've not paid attention to collectively enough is, why, since the last ice age, have humans not differentiated much? You know, when we look at all of our animal relatives have differentiated into different subspecies, different sizes, adaptively changed, sometimes in very punctuated ways in different environments. But we as humans, maybe we've gotten a little bit taller, but that's it. We've been held in this evolutionary trench, as it were, in order for us to liberate the energy that otherwise would be used for differentiation to actually build this noosphere thing. Now, the consequence of being preoccupied with the mental field, as we have been, means many things. It means also that because of the nature of mind, our understanding has been forged through categorization. This is an ancient adaptive strategy that we use to make efficient sense and efficient communication of the nature of reality so that we can build consensus reality and thrive in oftentimes very challenging ecological niches. So what we do, and what we have been doing, is we've been putting categories of knowing into silos. And the unintended consequence of that is that we also create these false narratives that these different silos are somehow independent from one another and not interdependent. And that's not to say that there is some independence between these domains of knowledge and inquiry. So, for instance, there is this phenomenon we know of emergent behavior, that in complex systems, there are certain things as the system becomes more and more complex that you cannot predict based on the pieces and parts of the simpler system. That is probably one of the great observations, one of the most potent observations that have come out of this time of preoccupation with the mental field. That is the probably the most valid way that we can sort of justify categorizing our domains of experience. But back to Chakaruna. What our native ancestors say is that our job right now is to bring those silos down, is to now stitch back together these seemingly disparate aspects of human experience into unified understanding. And oftentimes that unified understanding isn't the providence of the mind, it's the providence of the heart, the providence of the whole self, the providence of the non-local whole. Chakaruna, the bridge person, is said to be a very important agent in that. So those of you out there who are versed in medicine and have a seed of understanding in some sacred tradition, those of you who know law and sociology and also have understanding of plant medicine, you are Chakaruna. And you have the opportunity through your storytelling, through your presence, through the decisions you make in structuring your life, how to show what parts of these seemingly disparate things that you've become or are becoming a master of are actually one thing. And what our elders say is that prophecy will not be fulfilled unless there's a threshold of Chakaruna bringing those silos down. It's as simple as that. So for me personally, that's what I strive to do in all my teaching is to help people more deeply and objectively explore within themselves and within their culture where there are false narratives that create separation and division, and thus prevent us from a unified understanding of what my friend David McConville refers to as a coherent cosmology, an understanding of our place in space and our purposefulness in the universe at this particular time.
So beautifully shared. Thank you.
Sure.
It's interesting even just hearing like the words separation, division. It seems like everything out there is working against this. I love that. I don't know if it's your term or it's just something you say a lot, but the counter evolutionary forces. It just seems like more and more around us, even in these conscious communities, medicine communities and spiritual world. There's more that seems to be working against that, right? Like there's more division, there's more arguing. Even I was talking to one of our common friends, Marin, yesterday, and I was like, yeah, they chose that because it gets more clicks because it's more divisive. It's just how the algorithms work. They actually reward more divisive content and more, like working against one another. And I'm wondering, as we navigate this world, that just seems to get getting wilder and wilder, as you said, like the mental plane, and maybe it's also been chaotic at the same time. And now we can throw in AI, and now we don't even know what's real anymore. You know, how do you think that this is going to be navigated by the bridge people? Like, is it like, how does a bridge person even stay clear in who they truly are and their sovereignty? And it's been very interesting to watch, even within communities that you believe are doing really like good conscious work, and then we see a lot of this like infiltrating in, and I'm wondering like what is going on. Is this just a mass initiation that we all need to go through? And then, I keep waiting. It's like, oh gosh, how many more lifetimes is this going to take? But yeah, what are your views on that and what's happening like right now in this kind of reality that we're stepping into?
Well, I think the simplest answer to your question is if you want to be an effective agent in this transformative time, be a good student. It's as simple as that. What does it mean to be a good student? A good student maintains a position of openness and a position of humility, a position of receptivity. I don't know. And right now, one of the things that characterizes this particular time is that within every truth there's a seed of deception, and within every deception there's a seed of truth. So the question is that I pose to my colleagues and students is, can you find a centered place of peace and sovereignty in that unknowing? And there are many dimensions to this. One could argue that there's actually no more darkness and deception than there's been in the past few thousand years on the planet. But the darkness and deception is highly energized because it's threatened. The counter-evolutionary forces, it's my polite way of saying jerks and not nice F-wads. Sorry.
I know, I love it. It's my favorite.
So those counter-evolutionary forces always show up. They always show up, and it is part of the reciprocal behavior of how the universe is organizing itself at this level, what the Andean natives refer to as the third level. And another bit that relates to this, the navigation of this evolutionary time, goes back to a very simple teaching from one of my most significant teachers, grandmother Jacqueline Redleaf, who is a beloved Cherokee Choctaw elder. And she said, the ultimate measure of one's spiritual maturity is their response to waking up one day and realizing that everything that they've known, believed, or thought is complete bollocks, completely wrong. How do you respond to that? And, that question is actually a prayer, and can, in the form of a prayer, be very, very powerful. I don't know. Now, if we think about ritual and ceremonial consciousness, this place of I don't know has a very interesting physiological and bioenergetic effect upon us. And this isn't new, and this isn't just the providence of American native wisdom. I mean, you think about the Japanese koan, the unanswerable poem riddle. This all stems from the understanding that the process of jumping to a place of comfort and answerability, coming to a conclusion, has the necessary and natural effect of shutting all of our antennas down. I got this. I figured it out. I got all my information. I've made my conclusion. It's time to move on. But if you stay in a place of I don't know, a place of mystery and embracing awe and excitement about what might be next, your antenna stays in a place of collecting useful information. This is the point of ritual and ceremony. Ritual and ceremony aren't artifacts of obsolete artifacts of primitive culture. No, they are disciplined means to manage our ability to bring in useful information into our fields. So isn't it exciting to think that on the other side of this evolutionary jump that we're about to take, that the entire landscape of how the embodied soul interacts, how consciousness binds and interacts with nature may completely change. Even the laws of physics may completely change. And we're starting to see, even in the most the most conservative realms of Western science, that things are changing. I mean, look at what's happened to the baseline of the placebo effect in the last 20 years. I mean, it's like doubled. What does that say? I mean, it says that the imprimatur of consciousness on the unfolding of events, and in this case, physiological events, is getting more and more potent. So when the Hopi prophecy says this could be a good time, I mean, that's what they're saying. They're like, if you have made the decision in your life to cultivate a disciplined inner life and to bridle your emotions and to understand what authentic connection is, to prioritize in these ways, then this is actually a good time. The powers of manifestation right now are more potent than they've been on the planet in probably 3,000 years.
I'm going like this because I talk about it a lot. I mean, I've noticed this even within working with clients for 10 years. The difference between 5 years ago and then 5 years before that is wild, just to witness in other people. And one of my other teachers who's been doing his modality for about 45 years has said, it's just everything's happening faster. People are healing faster, changing faster, manifesting faster. And it's fascinating and it's beautiful. And it's like, well, there's a supportive force. That's how it feels to me. I don't, I very much is like, I don't know what it is, but, thank you. And it is exciting. I think, I'm curious what your views are though, on all the fear out there, I mean, there's so many explanations, of course, like the mainstream culture on Instagram comments is like, oh, it's just your narcissistic ego, and there is a fair amount of that, and we know, but on such a deeper level. And then there's like, oh, okay, it's just the Kali Yuga and that's it. But what is happening to humanity? And do you generally, I mean, this is exciting, what we're just talking about. I tend to be an optimist, but do you find that you have hope for where we're going? Like, do you think this prophecy will play out because the light always prevails? Or do you think there is a chance that humanity is going to just keep going into complete and total annihilation, and then who knows, the earth probably will continue to live on without us? But what are your views on that?
Yeah. I'm hopeful. I kind of take the Churchill approach. It's Churchill said right before the Germans started bombing London, conditions are so dismal that we have no other choice than to be optimistic. But because consciousness is more potent, there's an esoteric dimension to what he sort of semi-comically said, and that is that if we together, in a criticality of consensus understanding, believe that our dreaming has a more potent effect on the unfolding of future events, those who are aspirants have no other choice than to be optimistic. I mean, it's a responsibility, actually. And one of the things, there's so many things underneath your question. First is that there is this overarching tragic irony that we at once realize that 90% of our waking experience is governed by emotions. Yet in industrialized Western culture, and for most of the world, as a matter of fact, we provide no education for our children about how to actually manage that piece of the world. And one of the consequences of that is that we do not understand as a collective whole that certain adaptive strategies that served us very, very, very well long ago need to be put on the chopping block understood for what they are, and retooled and possibly eliminated or repositioned in the collective and individual human psyche. For instance, negativity bias. Negativity bias is one of the greatest drivers of fear, and fear in turn is one of the things that makes it most difficult to actually comprehend the nature of reality. And negativity bias has been very useful. When you're out in the woods and you see a tiger for the first time, the response of not going, oh, look at that cute, beautiful thing, I want to pet it. The assumption that this novel stimulus, this novel thing in my field is actually dangerous has been an adaptive strategy, right? But does it serve us now? And it drives everything. It drives dopamine. It drives neurochemistry that is actually quite addictive. So, in a way, part of our successfully navigating this evolutionary time is that we have to reestablish true learning in communities. And the scale of true learning in communities might be very different than what we're used to. The institutionalization of learning has not really worked. I mean, how many kids that you talk to in high school have ever heard of negativity bias, despite the fact that it rules probably half of their experience? And, you know, I say this not only because I think that there's some truth in it, but also because we can't deny the level of suffering that our kids are going through right now. It is very hard to be a young person right now. As a matter of fact, one of my colleagues in Eagle Condor works for the CDC, and she was part of a commission that just described this new billable mental health anomaly called climate anxiety crisis in kids. The world is falling apart, and it's my parents' fault, and I can't do anything about it. This is heavy stuff, Beth. Heavy stuff.
God.
But we can handle it, but we have to be really committed. And you know, our native elders tell us that one of the most important ways to do that is to think about education in a different way. This kind of exchange, one of the reasons I think podcasts are so amazing and so hot right now is because it's storytelling. And our native relatives tell us, our elders tell us that the storyteller has to come back. Because what does the storyteller do? The storyteller brings the silos down. So we're back to that.
Yeah, and it's the heart energy, you know, it's like, and especially, you know, this world, it's been wild, even just the last few months to see AI and the explosion. Like I can literally read something and be like, oh, AI wrote that. I mean, it's becoming more obvious than ever. And I hope that I don't know. I'm like, is it better that it changes? Because then it's going to be like, you know, but I'm like, you can feel someone's heart and energy in what they even write, you know, and what they say. And the stories, I don't think could ever come from an AI. I don't know, maybe, I guess if you feed it enough. And it's the human heart. And like you said, the community, you know, like when we were in your program, it was great. It was like not just us looking at the teacher and having the teacher, you know, spiel out to us for 8 hours straight. It was interactive, you know, it was discussions, it was heated, it was even debate. And it was fun, you know, and it's like, oh, this is a way to become more open, get a little more curious, you know, maybe even have some of your views that you're really holding on to challenged, you know, and like you said, and I think this is what we're seeing out there, and you know, especially in America, I think this is a very Western perspective right now of being a person on the internet to watch all the divisive content and all the people arguing, is that there is not much curiosity. There's no openness. There's like, I'm right, you're wrong. I'm not even willing to listen. And actually, I'm going to just block and delete you. And it's like, wow, that's where we're at. And, you know, moments like that, all I can do is just send prayers and hope for the best and hold myself to a different way and hope that becomes contagious. But, And so I want to talk about, because you mentioned.
Can I say something
please.
about AI? Because I think
Yeah,
there's.
please.
I want to propose one thing to you, and that is that AI is dangerous only in proportion to our laziness. If I am lazy and entitled and I see AI as something that will do my work for me, then that's going to allow the people who are greedy and driving AI for profit to probably bring AI to a place that is extraordinarily dangerous. What if, and this is wisdom that really comes from my friend Frank Teneski, who's one of the world's leading industrial designers. And we do a lot of collaboration stuff. As a matter of fact, he got really frustrated about some political stuff. He's not a songwriter, a little bit of a poet, and he used AI to create all of these amazing songs to say what he needed to say. And that created an amazing conversation. And we've actually done a few musical projects together. But what he said, I think, was really potent. He said, AI is a prototyping tool. It's a tool. And if we use it in that way, if we have a consensus and agreement throughout all of our institutions that we're actually going to use it as a tool, just like a three-dimensional printer, then we are going to the result will be that we will consciously drive our own neurological development to catapult beyond it. But it's our choice. Is it something that's going to take over the world and destroy the world? Maybe. And our only way of controlling that is to get engaged and actually use it for what it's meant to do, and that's to sharpen our consciousness. Personally, if I'm worried about one domain of distributed computing technology, it's what people are going to do as quantum computing gets more and more reduced to practice and more stabilized. It's very likely that all of the encryption codes that have ever been created for any atomic bomb, any multinational bank, have probably been cracked by one of the small handful of quantum computers that are operating. That's my main concern, because what happens, we are at this point of our evolution really into our secrets, really into protecting stuff. And one of the consequences of quantum computing being reduced to practice is that all of these encryption codes that with conventional computing would have taken thousands of years to crack can be cracked in half a second. So there's implications
Perspective,
there.
right? Yeah, perspective.
No more secrets, children.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's constantly written in the current astrologies, like more unveiling, like more exposing. And I think there is, I feel like we see more and more of this, like the truth coming to light. But then, of course, everyone's like, well, what do we even know it's true? Like no one even knows what's true anymore. And it's a wild world. And I personally, I know this, people are not going to like this, but I find it actually quite entertaining sometimes. It's like, not to watch the world go up in flames or anything, but to just watch like the senselessness and really come back to center, and really see the bigger picture. There's this big earth, there's beautiful humans, life is beautiful. This is actually a very interesting time to be alive. And, not to get so caught up in all the minutia, but it's been fascinating. It's like, I don't really watch movies anymore because I just find observing the world and the evolution is just so fascinating. But yeah, I want to get into a little bit about, the Andean cosmology that you teach, and you've mentioned some of your elders and maestros and teachers. One thing that I know we've talked about before, and I've actually asked a lot of my guests this over the years, is when you are coming from the Western perspective as a white male living in North Carolina, blah, blah, blah. I'm sure you've heard the criticism, because I think all of us have. I was actually just talking to our friend Marin about this yesterday when we were both getting IVs at the same time, about the criticism. And, because she's like, yeah, someone yelled at me for teaching this ancient wisdom, and because I'm a white girl. Yeah, what do you say to this? I mean, because we hear this a lot on the internet. Every time I interview someone on this show who is not of like exact indigenous or mestizo background, it's like this question comes up. And what do you say to it? It's like you're teaching this really important cosmology that I think is very helpful and supportive for so many people. And then there's people out there who believe that it is only owned by a certain group of people and it should not be shared by anyone except them. Thoughts?
Yeah. So yes, yes, and yes. One has to, at the end of the day, honor each individual tradition for what their ways and principles of engagement are. And some native traditions do hold certain teachings, sometimes all of their teachings, in a way that only blood relatives are allowed to transmit and share. But that's not the universal principle. As a matter of fact, the majority of native elders that I've encountered are rather enthusiastic about having partners that are not part of their tribal units, part of their bloodlines, actually participating and collaborating in helping the teaching stay alive. We are with impunity committing ethnocide, and we have been for a very long time, since one could argue since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Since you and I have been alive, half the world's languages have disappeared. And it's that diversity of knowing and being that actually is probably our most powerful adaptive strategy. And many native elders understand that, and understand that it is actually people beyond their bloodlines that have the greatest promise in helping preserve these traditions. There is actually prophecy in the Andean traditions that basically say when the earth catches her fever and the glaciers begin to melt, then there will be a joining of light-skinned people from the north with our people from the mountains to create a gateway for the new humanity. So they see, our Andean brothers and sisters kind of see us as an essential piece of the fulfillment of prophecy. And I have to just knock on wood. I mean, I've been so fortunate. I've only really gotten, in all the decades that I've been doing this work, I've only gotten heat once in a public forum about, being a white guy doing this. And of course, I immediately went to my teachers, and they're like, there was like one of them. The only time I ever heard him cuss, he said, "Don't you effing listen to those people. Don't stop doing what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing." Now, that's not to say that that's, what I'm speaking to is universal. There are ethical and moral considerations. Have you been invited to learn the tradition? Are you walking in sacred reciprocity? Are you giving back to the teacher and to the culture from which you are, learning and experiencing these miraculous gifts of knowing and healing? Have you been given permission to share? And what of that which you've learned have you been given permission to share? And then another piece that's often overlooked, especially since we have this kind of like new age buffet way of looking at spiritual traditions. I'm going to take some stuff from here because it tastes good. I'm going to take some stuff from there and put together this amalgam, and pretty soon it just becomes a hot mess of spiritual bypass. But that's a whole different story. One of the covenants to walk in right relations with native medicine is to do the whole thing, to learn the language, to understand how your teachers live and how their ancestors live, to embrace the teachings in their totality and not just select things that are convenient or feel good. These are all things that prevent us from the problematic areas of misappropriation. It is very complex, and some cultures are carrying very old, sometimes inherited, collective wounds from colonizers. And we are still going to suffer until we can figure out collectively how to heal those wounds, or how to hold space for those beautiful peoples to have the opportunity to heal those wounds. It's a complex matter because many times those people are displaced from their ancestral lands, and the ancestral lands themselves hold much of the signal of the wounding. So part of the equation of restoration often requires bringing the people back, the people having access to their ancestral lands to complete the healing process. One of the things that we don't talk about, at least in my opinion, enough, is the consequences in the age of motorized transportation that spiritual traditions that were once the providence of a 200 square mile arena are now smeared all around the world. There are consequences to that. There are consequences of bringing a Himalayan rim set of practices to a group of people in San Diego. I mean, it's because the land is different, the climate is different, the constitution's different, the food's different, the spirits in the land, the ancestral spirits are different, and that has consequences. So, part of the appropriation, misappropriation equation too has to not only do with people from different cultures teaching, but how they teach and what do they consider being an adequate container for the teaching to happen. It's a very serious consideration. It is hard, just a simple analogy. I mean, it's very hard for a Chinese chef to walk into a French kitchen, a kitchen specializing in cooking French food, and actually do their thing well right off the bat, right? It's same. So how do you prepare the ground? These are all areas that I personally believe need to be part of a much deeper dialogue. And one of my frustrations, and you know this about me, Beth, is one of my frustrations with the psychedelic therapy movement is that there is, I think, a tremendous confusion about what the word sacred means. I think people are very reverent about the power of these medicines to help people, but being reverent is very different than understanding the sacred nature of something. So that's another conversation that I think needs to happen on a much deeper level.
Former client who's a friend and a leader out there in this kind of psychedelic space. I was just talking to him about this earlier today because it's also getting very wild in that world. So thank you for sharing this. And the one aspect of this work that I've always just found, or not just this work, but any work from other indigenous communities around the world and different cultures, is that the kind of modern westernized world really needs these teachings. And I'm wondering if the elders talk about this, because one time I sat in the middle of the jungle with my curandero and tried to talk to him about this, in his broken Spanish, and but he understood what I was saying, and his response was basically like, yeah, well, the United States really needs this, and his perspective is only U.S. because that's the only place he'll travel outside of Peru. But it was like, well, they're in need of healing, and this is one of the reasons it's spreading there. And I'm wondering, do the elders that you work with say that? Because it is kind of like, well, maybe if I was living out in a mountaintop in the Sacred Valley in Peru, or in that region, maybe life would be easier and different and a little more open and more curiosity and more, people working together in community. But, here we are, and I'm very blessed, and probably you as well, to live in a pretty good community like that. But, the second I go visit someone I know and maybe a different culture within the United States, it's like, wow, I forget. Like, it is a really intense world out there. And the lack of presence, just even in the little everyday and like you said, with the children. But yeah, what do the elders say about bringing this to almost to more people? Because I believe, I mean, this is what I've always said, is that if we spread these teachings around the world, even if it's, even if people are just taking the little bit, but maybe it's better than nothing. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a really good question. So yeah, I think yes to everything you've said from the perspective of my knowing and experience. Yes, my teachers want to work with us gringos and people in Europe because we are sick. The unintended consequences of the industrialization of our food systems, of our belief systems, of our education has brought us to a place of where there's so much dis-ease. There's also the aspect that we talked about right at the beginning of our time together, and that is that because we built the essentially we led the building of this new level of sophistication in the mental field, we need to participate in its integration with the rest of what it means to be living beings. And so through collaboration, through us getting more healthy and us being Chakaruna, that's why our teachers down south are so enthusiastic about working with us, is because they see that we are an essential part of prophecy. So they're not coming here to fix broken people. They're here to collaborate and help us get out of our own way the things that are keeping us from being effective and participating in this next phase of evolution. And, from the Vegetalista tradition, one can say that because it is a global distributed intelligence, part of Great Earth Mother, the medicine goes where it's needed. Has it been a hot mess? Sometimes. Are the benefits greater than the liabilities? Most of the time. Sometimes I do wonder about that balance and how that's played out in places like California, where California is just always on the evolutionary edge, and I see a lot of good work, and I also see a lot that is quite disconcerting. I know
you could throw Austin in that category now too.
Yeah.
It's come up so much lately because trust me, if I could tell every story I've heard over the years, it's like, whoa. But, and this is also what Dr. Rick Doblin says as well. It's like, well, the benefits outweigh the harm being done. At least that's what we'd all like to think. And I actually do believe that, because we don't hear every positive healing story. We hear most of the abuse stories, kind of like a lot of the world, right? But like you said, it's like this really focusing on this larger picture. So thank you for sharing. And I do really believe in this perspective as well. It's a very touchy time, to be walking this path with great reverence, with reciprocity and respect, but also to hold that vision of like, wow, what if we do bring these beautiful teachings to people that maybe never even had access to it, or it's like a completely new concept. And how could we actually, like as a bridge person, it's like infiltrate, I don't know, like, what did you say, like an accountant, or, bring this into a corporate setting? Who knows what the future will hold? Seems kind of wild to think about, but what if there was a sacred council, around a boardroom where they actually, it's like to stop and think about, like, maybe there is a greater way or a different way that could be done. Because I think a lot of people dream of, and including me, it's like, oh, if I could just snap my fingers and have this be this beautiful new earth, and capitalism doesn't even exist anymore, we're all just trading and farming. And maybe, but but I think it's going to be a process to get there, and I think that's where you mentioned this kind of like doing the bridge work. But
I think it's starting to happen.
yeah.
I think about Kevin Jones, the founder of SOCAP, the Social Capital Equity Markets conference, yearly conference in San Francisco. I guess it's in San Francisco. And he also started the first venture capital firm in the Bay Area that's focused on triple bottom line organizations. And even though he's not part of SOCAP anymore, SOCAP still has a thread of healing and spirituality woven in, and it's increasingly understood that it is not only a nice thing to do from the perspective of optics, but actually a moral imperative is to assure that when people leave your company, they're actually more healed and more enabled and happier than when they came in. I remember in 2000, back as far as 2012, I was in California at a big convergence event, and I had lunch in Palo Alto with the then head of T2 Capital, which is one of the biggest venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. And he was like, Jeff, I just had this incredible meeting with all of these global financial leaders, venture capitalists, and we were talking about models and talking about the future and how do you measure success and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, oh boy, here we go. I'm going to hear some kind of like fancy model about financial metrics and return on investment and leverage and all that kind of crap. And he goes, after 3 days of debate, we found the ultimate measure. And you know what he said? Love.
Yes. Oh, love. Good.
And I was like, wow, there is hope. Yeah. So, one of the things I am a huge fan of David Byrne. And one of the things that I really appreciate about his recent work is that he has been always done this with his music, but really recently has really created a forum to fight negativity bias, and that's Reasons to Be Cheerful. His magazine, and I guess it was a podcast for a while, that just focuses on all the great stuff that is happening on this planet. Check it out if you haven't seen it. Reasons to Be Cheerful. Yeah.
So good. Well, Jeff, I know you have a lot coming up. You have a retreat in, I think it's August at Akira. You have Omega Institute, local kind of to me. We're going to put the links to that right here.
Thank
and then
you.
you have the Eagle Condor Council, and then you're heading to Peru in like a week, which by the time this is published, you'll already be back. But I do know I think you go to Peru at least once a year, correct?
Yeah, we do yearly pilgrimages with our elders and brothers and sisters down in Peru. We take groups every year. We have a year-long mystery school. That's been kind of our cornerstone program, but we have a new cadre of teachers who are teaching introductory programming. I'm launching, if you're interested in the intersection of consciousness, science, and spirituality, in August, I'm launching a 6-part Zoom program on consciousness, spirituality, and sovereignty that should be really interesting. And it's a much deeper exposition of many of these threads we talked about today. Doing quite a bit of advanced programming too. My partner Cindy and I offer weekend programs focused on finding deeper ways to use and engage with our bodies in healthy ways so that we can be more potent agents of healing in the world. All of that's on the Eagle Condor Council website, eaglecondorcouncil.org.
And we'll have the links right here in the show notes. And by the way, let me know when that program launches. I'm happy to share it around and probably join it myself.
Great.
But yeah, Jeff, there's so much more we could talk about. I'll probably have to have you back on because I want to have a whole separate episode on getting into like entities and all the fun stuff that happens in medicine settings. But we'll do another episode on that one day.
I'd love it. Good to be with you.
Thank you so much for being here. And, I will say, by the way, thank you so much for really holding it in your community together down there in Asheville, raising money and, filling me in off camera about the status of things. And I just want to remind people that, Asheville is not completely better. And, if you have a community there or feel called to support, please support. It's the way of this world. It's like something big happens, people get, they care for a minute and then on to the next thing, and I just want to call that out because I think it's important to name.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Oh, I wish I could come to Peru with you next week.
Yeah.
A week and a half. One of these days. This is my year off of Peru. I said, I was like, I'm not going because I really want to go to Egypt. But thank you so much for being here. It was such a joy to have you.
Yeah, good to see you.